Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. Imagine a block of ice undisturbed for millennia, holding a secret so terrifying it could rewrite history. What if that secret wasn't just ancient but alive? Get ready to uncover the chilling truth about a prehistoric terror found frozen deep within an iceberg. A discovery that will haunt your deepest fears. My name is Dr. Nathan Cross, and I'm a paleontologist, or at least I was. I don't know what I am anymore. What I've seen, what I've survived, it changes you in ways that go deeper than flesh and bone. They tell me I'm suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, that the isolation and the storm created a shared delusion among the survivors. But I know what I saw. God help me, I know what we unleashed. The nightmares haven't stopped. Every night when I close my eyes, I'm back there, back in that frozen hell where we broke the seal on something that should have remained buried forever. The screams still echo in my head, the sounds of tearing flesh, the inhuman shrieks of creatures that died before humanity even existed. It started in May of 2023. I was 41 years old then, though I looked older. Grief does that to you, ages you, in ways that go beyond the physical, carving lines into your face and stealing the light from your eyes. My son Tommy had died 2 years earlier. Leukemia. He was only 7 years old, just a little boy with his whole life ahead of him. After the funeral, after the divorce, after everything fell apart like a house of cards in a strong wind, I buried myself in my work. Literally buried myself, as it turns out. I took every remote assignment I could find, every excuse to be as far from civilization as possible, as far from the memories that haunted every corner of my old life. That's how I ended up at Glacier Station Epsilon in northern Greenland, about as far from human civilization as you can get, without leaving the planet entirely. The station was small, housing 15 researchers studying ancient climate patterns through ice core analysis. It was one of several remote research facilities scattered across Greenland's interior, each one a tiny bubble of warmth and life in an endless expanse of frozen desolation. Epsilon was considered one of the more comfortable postings, if you could call any place comfortable, where the temperature regularly dropped to -40 and the sun disappeared for months at a time. It was perfect for me, isolated, a place where I could lose myself in millions of years of frozen history and forget about the 7 years I'd lost, the 7 years of watching my son grow that had been stolen from me. I arrived on May 3rd, flying in on a supply helicopter that fought fierce winds the entire journey. The station sat on the edge of the Greenland ice sheet, a cluster of prefabricated buildings, connected by enclosed walkways that looked like umbilical cords linking separate organs. The landscape was beautiful, in a desolate way, endless white in every direction stretching to a horizon that seemed impossibly distant. The kind of emptiness that either soothes you or drives you mad, with no middle ground. I found it soothing at first, that vast nothingness that made human problems seem insignificant by comparison. My team was small but accomplished. Dr. Olivia Reeves was our veterinary pathologist, a sharp woman in her 30s with an infectious enthusiasm for extinct megafauna that reminded me of why I'd gotten into paleontology in the first place. She'd done her doctoral work on mammoth tissue preservation and had published several groundbreaking papers on cellular degradation in permafrost environments. Dr. Henrik Strand, our glaciologist, was a quiet Norwegian who'd spent more time on ice sheets than solid ground. He had a weathered face and distant eyes that suggested he preferred the company of ice to people, and I couldn't blame him. And then there was Liam Fisher, a documentary filmmaker who'd somehow convinced the funding committee that our research deserved to be filmed for posterity. He was young, maybe 28, with the kind of earnest enthusiasm that I found both endearing and exhausting. My specialty was extinct megafaunia preservation in permafrost. I'd spent 20 years studying bones and fossils, examining the remains of mammoths and cave bears pulled from the Siberian tundra, analysing tissue samples that had been frozen for tens of thousands of years. I'd written papers on preservation techniques, consulted on museum exhibits, taught graduate courses on Pleistocene biology. I never imagined I'd see one of my subjects breathe, never dreamed that frozen and dead weren't always the same thing. The first week was routine in the way that scientific fieldwork is always routine. Long hours of careful work, punctuated by moments of mild interest. We drilled core samples, analysed ice strata, documented everything with numbing repetition. Each layer of ice told a story. Trapped air bubbles preserving ancient atmospheres, dust particles marking volcanic eruptions, the slow accumulation of snow compressed into crystalline time capsules. I welcomed the monotony, embraced it even. It kept the memories at bay, kept me from thinking about Tommy's empty bedroom, about his toys still scattered across the floor, because I couldn't bring myself to pack them away, about the way his laugh had sounded echoing through our house. The other researchers at the station were a mix of nationalities and specialties. There was Emma Valdez, our communications specialist from Mexico, who kept us connected to the outside world through satellite uplinks and radio systems. She was in her 40s, professional and efficient, with a dry sense of humour that surfaced during long shifts. David Park, a young Korean technician, handled our equipment maintenance and seemed able to fix anything with duct tape and ingenuity. Sophie Chen was a lab assistant from Singapore, fresh out of graduate school and eager to prove herself. Jack Torres, our security officer, was an ex-military American who'd taken the posting because he loved the solitude. He was the only one armed, carrying a large caliber rifle meant for polar bear defense. Then there were the support staff, the people who kept the station running, cooks, mechanics, a medical technician, all of them experienced in Arctic operations. Everything changed on May 11th. Henrik had been running automated ice-penetrating radar sweeps, mapping the subsurface structure of the glacier with equipment that sent radio waves deep into the ice and analysed the returning echoes. It was standard procedure, looking for optimal drilling sites and documenting the ice sheet's internal geography, the hidden landscape of ancient snow layers and geological features. That morning, he burst into the cafeteria during breakfast, his normally calm demeanour completely shattered. His hands were shaking as he held his tablet, his face pale despite the months he'd spent in harsh conditions. "We've got an anomaly," he said, his Norwegian accent thicker than usual in his agitation. He pulled up the radar readings on his tablet and we crowded around the screen. A big one, 800 feet down. The radar image showed a massive void in the ice, roughly 200 feet across and at least 80 feet high. It appeared as a dark space on the scan, a bubble of nothing in the solid ice. It shouldn't have existed. At that depth, under that much pressure from the ice above, any air pockets should have been crushed out of existence millions of years ago, compressed into nothing by the sheer weight of accumulated snow and ice. Raymond Holt, the station director, suggested it might be a sensor glitch. He was a cautious man, methodical to a fault, the kind who checked every box twice and questioned every unexpected result. Raymond was in his late 50s with greying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like the career academic he was. but Henrik insisted, showing us 3 separate sweeps taken from different angles that all confirmed the same reading. "It's real," he said firmly. "There's a cavity down there. A large one. The walls are defined, not irregular, like you'd expect from a natural formation. It's almost too regular, too perfect." Something about it caught my attention, a nagging sense that I'd seen similar formations in my research, but never this large, never this deep, never this well preserved. I convinced them we needed to get a camera down there to see what we were dealing with before we made any decisions about how to proceed. It took 2 days to drill the exploratory borehole, working around the clock in shifts to keep the operation moving. The drill's whine became a constant background noise, a mechanical scream that echoed across the ice and vibrated through the station's floors. Liam filmed everything, his camera a constant presence, documenting what we all assumed would be a routine geological curiosity. I found it annoying at first being constantly recorded, but he had a gift for staying invisible when it mattered, for anticipating when to film and when to put the camera down and just be present. On May 13th at 3:17 in the afternoon, we lowered the camera into the borehole. We gathered around the monitors in the main lab, watching the feed as the camera descended into darkness. The first 700 feet were exactly what we expected, precisely what decades of ice core research had taught us to anticipate. Compressed ice, layers of sediment marking ancient climate shifts, the geological diary of the planet written in frozen water. Each layer represented years or decades or centuries, depending on the accumulation rate, a timeline stretching back through human history, through the Ice Age, through warm periods and cold periods, the breathing of the planet preserved in crystalline form. Then, at 750 feet, everything changed in a way that made my scalp prickle with instinctive unease. The ice became cloudy, filled with suspended particles that created a murky zone, unlike anything in the clear layers above. Not sediment, something else, something organic. The particles were irregular, varying in size and density, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate. Olivia leaned closer to the monitor, her voice barely a whisper, asking if we were seeing what she thought we were seeing. I told Henrik to keep going, my heart starting to race with a mixture of excitement and something darker, something that felt like the dread you feel before opening a door you know you shouldn't open. At 803 feet, the camera broke through into open space, and the world as we knew it changed forever. What we saw on that grainy, fisheye footage made everyone in the room go silent. Not the excited chatter you'd expect from scientists making a discovery, but the profound silence of people confronting something their minds couldn't immediately process. The cavern was enormous, far larger than the radar had suggested. The camera's lights barely reached the far walls, creating a sphere of illumination in an ocean of darkness. But what held our attention, what made several people gasp audibly, were the shapes embedded in the ice. Dozens of them, large, clearly organic, frozen in various positions throughout the cavern walls and ceiling like some nightmarish art installation. They looked like animals, massive ones, suspended in crystal clear ice like insects in amber, but on a scale that defied comprehension. The clarity of the ice was remarkable, almost supernatural in its transparency. These weren't vague shapes or ambiguous shadows. These were distinct creatures, perfectly preserved, every detail visible through the ice. I asked Henrik to get closer to one of the shapes near the camera, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. He maneuvered the camera towards the wall with practiced skill, and as the light played across the ice, details emerged with horrifying clarity. A skull, massive, elongated, with teeth the length of my forearm, protruding from powerful jaws. The bone structure was unmistakable to anyone who'd studied paleontology. I'd seen enough fossils, enough reconstructions, enough museum specimens to recognize it instantly. Tyrannosaurus rex. But not fossilized, not mineralized. Not the brown and grey bones we found in rock formations. This was frozen flesh and bone, actual tissue, skin visible beneath what appeared to be a coating of small scales. The bone wasn't mineralized, the tissue wasn't degraded into the dark organic residue we sometimes found in exceptional fossil sites. It looked like it had been flash frozen, preserved with impossible perfection, every cell intact, every structure maintained. Raymond's voice came out as barely a whisper, saying it wasn't possible, couldn't be possible. The laws of physics, of biology, of everything we understood about death and decay said this shouldn't exist. But Olivia was already identifying others, her years of training kicking in, despite the impossibility of what we were seeing. She pointed out what appeared to be a Triceratops, its distinctive frill, and 3 horns clearly visible through the ice, and those smaller specimens, positioned in what looked like running postures. Could they be raptors? The camera panned across the cavern slowly, revealing the full scope of the discovery. At least 30 distinct specimens representing multiple species from the late Cretaceous period. Tyrannosaurs, multiple Triceratops of varying sizes, what appeared to be ankylosaurs with their distinctive armoured backs, even the delicate wings of pteranodons visible through the ice near the ceiling, their fragile wing membranes somehow intact after millions of years. Henrik studied the ice formations with growing concern, his professional expertise warring with what he was seeing. He explained that the layering was all wrong, that the crystalline structure didn't match anything in the geological record. This wasn't gradual freezing over millennia, the slow accumulation of ice that buried and preserved. This was catastrophic, incredibly rapid, almost instantaneous. These animals had been flash frozen, probably within minutes or even seconds, caught in whatever killed them, and preserved at the moment of death. The implications were staggering. Flash freezing on this scale would require temperatures dropping hundreds of degrees, almost instantly, or immersion in some supercooled liquid, both scenarios that seemed physically impossible. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, couldn't process what I was seeing in any rational way. In 20 years of paleontology, I'd never seen anything like this. I'd studied thousands of fossils, examined countless specimens, published dozens of papers. Dinosaurs died 66 million years ago, victims of an extinction event that wiped out most life on Earth. They fossilized, their bones slowly mineralized over millions of years, their soft tissues long since decayed. We didn't find frozen dinosaurs, it was impossible. Every principle of taphonomy, the study of how organisms decay and fossilize, said this couldn't exist. And yet, there they were, staring at us through 800 feet of ice. The decision to excavate took 3 days of intense debate, clearance requests with the funding committee back in Copenhagen, authorization from multiple government agencies, and logistical planning. Those 3 days felt like an eternity, each hour crawling by with agonizing slowness. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that T-Rex skull staring at me through the ice, its eye socket a dark void that seemed to look directly into my soul. I spent my nights in the lab, reviewing the camera footage frame by frame, measuring, analysing, trying to understand what we'd found. Olivia joined me often, bringing coffee and companionship, both of us too excited and too unnerved to rest. "This changes everything, Nathan," she said one night, around 3 a.m, both of us exhausted but too wired to sleep. "If these specimens are as well preserved as they appear, if we can extract viable tissue samples, we could sequence dinosaur DNA, real DNA, not the fragments we found in fossils. We could understand their biology, their physiology, their evolutionary relationships. This is the discovery of the century." I nodded, but something in my gut twisted uneasily. It's too perfect, Olivia. Nature doesn't preserve things this well. There has to be something we're not understanding, some factor we're missing. Maybe, she conceded. But isn't that what makes it exciting? The unknown, the chance to rewrite the textbooks. I thought about Tommy then, about how excited he would have been. He'd loved dinosaurs with the pure, uncomplicated enthusiasm of childhood. His room had been full of plastic models, his walls covered with posters. We planned a trip to Montana, to the dinosaur fossil beds, a trip we never got to take. I wondered what he would have thought about this discovery, imagined his wide-eyed wonder. And for a moment, just a moment, the grief that usually sat like a stone in my chest eased slightly. Maybe this discovery could mean something, could be dedicated to his memory. Finally, on May 16th, we received authorization to begin drilling the access tunnel. We would use heated drill bits to create a shaft wide enough for people to descend. A tunnel that would require extensive shoring to prevent collapse. It was the slow, careful work, requiring constant monitoring. The ice at that depth was incredibly dense, compressed by the weight of 800 feet of glacier above it. We had to ensure the tunnel was stable, that we weren't creating stress fractures that could cause a catastrophic collapse. Henrik monitored it constantly, checking for stress fractures or signs of instability, adjusting our approach based on the ice's response. 6 days. It took 6 days to drill that tunnel, working in shifts around the clock, and every hour felt like torture. The anticipation built like a physical pressure in my chest. I threw myself into the work, volunteering for every shift, staying up late to study the camera footage, making detailed sketches of the specimens we could see. I barely ate, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. Olivia noticed, of course. She had a way of seeing through the walls people built around themselves. She found me alone in the lab at 2 a.m. one night, reviewing the footage frame by frame, measuring proportions, comparing what we were seeing to known specimens. "Nathan, you need to rest," she said gently, sitting down next to me without waiting for an invitation. "You're going to burn yourself out before we even get down there." "I'm fine," I said automatically, the lie we all tell when we're anything but fine. "You're not fine. None of us are really fine after what we've seen. But you're burning yourself out. When's the last time you ate a real meal? When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours?" She paused, then asked quietly, "Is this about Tommy?" I flinched at his name like I'd been struck. "Don't," I said, my voice harsh. "You can't keep running from it, Nathan. Throwing yourself into work isn't going to bring him back. I know you know that intellectually, but—" "I know he's not coming back," I interrupted, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "I was there. I watched him die over 6 months, watched the cancer eat him alive, while the doctors pumped him full of poison that didn't work. I held him when he was too weak to stand, when he couldn't keep food down, when he cried because he was in so much pain. I know he's not coming back, Olivia. That's exactly why I'm here." I gestured at the screen, at the frozen creatures staring at us through time. "Because down there, in that ice, there's something that shouldn't exist, but does. Something that's been dead for 66 million years, but looks like it could wake up tomorrow. And if I can understand that, if I can document it, if I can touch something impossible, then maybe I can find a way to accept that my 7-year-old son is in the ground, and I'll never see him again." The words hung in the air between us, raw and painful. Olivia reached out and squeezed my hand, saying nothing, because there was nothing to say. Some pain can't be fixed with words. We sat in silence for a while, watching the grainy footage loop on the screen, the frozen dead keeping their secrets. On May 19th, the tunnel was complete, and we prepared for our descent. That morning, 5 of us would make the first journey into the cavern. Myself, Olivia, Henrik, Raymond, and Liam with his camera. We suited up in thermal gear, checked our equipment 3 times, ran through safety protocols. The tunnel was cramped, barely wide enough for one person, with rope ladders for the vertical sections and ice screws hammered into the walls for handholds. Our headlamps created moving circles of light on the blue-white walls, illuminating the layers of ancient ice. The temperature dropped as we descended, the thermometer on my suit showing the decline. -10 degrees Celsius at the surface, -15 at 400 feet, -20 at the bottom. The descent took almost an hour, careful and methodical. Each movement had to be deliberate, each handhold tested. One slip, one mistake, and we'd plummet into darkness. My shoulders ached from the confined space. My legs burned from the awkward climbing position, but the discomfort was worth it. Then we emerged into the cavern, and words failed me. My mind simply couldn't process the scale of what I was seeing. The photographs, the video footage, none of it captured the reality of the space. The cavern was massive, roughly 200 feet across and 80 feet high at its peak. A cathedral of ice, but instead of saints and angels in the walls, there were monsters from prehistory. Our lights seemed tiny against the vastness, illuminating only small sections at a time like spotlights on a vast stage. But those sections revealed wonders beyond imagination, beyond anything I'd dreamed possible in my years of studying extinct life. Embedded in the walls, suspended in the ceiling, even beneath the floor of ice beneath our feet, were the dinosaurs. Not fossils, not bones, but actual animals, frozen mid-motion, like some massive diorama. The preservation was beyond anything I'd ever seen, beyond anything that should be possible. A Triceratops, its massive frill intact, skin preserved beneath a coating of rust-coloured scales that looked supple despite millions of years frozen. I could see the texture of the skin, the individual scales, even what appeared to be scars from old injuries. Velociraptors, smaller than Hollywood, had led people to believe, but covered in what appeared to be feathers, in shades of red and brown, frozen in various positions throughout the cavern. They weren't the scaly lizards of old illustrations, but something more bird-like, more alien, and more familiar at the same time. An ankylosaur, its armoured back clearly visible through the ice, the bony plates and spikes designed to defend against predators still sharp after an incomprehensible span of time. And the tyrannosaurs, 3 of them positioned at different points in the cavern, each at least 40 feet long. The largest was embedded in the far wall, its mouth open in what might have been a roar or a death scream flash frozen in that moment. I could see the serrations on its teeth, designed for tearing through flesh and bone. I could see the powerful leg muscles, the small but strong arms, the barrel chest that would have housed lungs, and a heart capable of supporting such a massive predator. "My God," Liam whispered, his camera sweeping across the scene, the lens barely able to capture the scope. "This is incredible. This is absolutely incredible." His hands were shaking as he filmed, not from cold, but from the overwhelming reality of what we were documenting. Olivia approached the nearest specimen, a raptor embedded in the ice about 6 feet off the ground, positioned as if it had been running when frozen. She placed her gloved hand against the ice, staring at the creature's face with an expression of awe. The cellular structure looks intact through the ice. I can see individual feathers, the texture of the skin, the joints in the legs. "Nathan, it's like they were frozen yesterday, not 66 million years ago. This level of preservation shouldn't be possible." Henrik was examining the ice itself, taking core samples from the walls with a specialized drill, his scientific curiosity overriding his shock. He worked methodically, collecting samples in sealed containers, making notes. "The crystalline structure is unusual," he said, studying a sample. "The ice is more uniform than it should be. The crystals are lined in ways I've never seen, in natural formations. This ice formed fast. faster than anything I've seen in modern glaciers, faster than anything in the geological record. We're talking about temperature drops of hundreds of degrees in seconds, maybe faster. And the temperature has been constant since formation, never varying more than a fraction of a degree. These specimens have been in perfect stasis, no freeze-thaw cycles, no degradation, perfect preservation. I moved deeper into the cavern, playing my light across the walls, noticing something that had bothered me in the camera footage. Now, standing in the space, I could see it clearly, and it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. All the dinosaurs were oriented in the same direction. They weren't randomly positioned, frozen wherever they'd been when catastrophe struck. They were all facing towards the cavern, moving into it, not away from something outside, but actively seeking this specific location. They were running, I said aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Look at their positions. They were running here. Raymond joined me, following my gaze, seeing what I was seeing. What do you mean? I pointed, using my light to trace the positions. Look at their body language, their positioning. The raptors are in mid-stride, legs extended, clearly running at full speed. The Triceratops has its head down, in charging posture, moving forward with purpose. That ankylosaur is crouched low but moving. You can see it in the leg position. They weren't living here, weren't caught here by accident. They ran here deliberately, sought shelter here, congregated here for a reason. Olivia's voice was quiet, almost afraid. Shelter from what? What could make predators and prey run together to the same location? What breaks that fundamental dynamic? That was the question that would haunt me. What could make a mixed group of predators and prey species run together to the same location? What catastrophe could unite natural enemies in a desperate flight to safety? What could flash freeze them all simultaneously, preserving them in perfect detail? These weren't scavengers finding a convenient place to die. These were animals in their prime, healthy specimens, all running from something terrible enough to override their survival instincts, to make them forget about hunting or being hunted in favor of seeking shelter. Then I saw it, and my blood ran cold. Deep in the ice, beyond the largest tyrannosaur, there was something else. The ice was cloudy there, filled with debris or sediment that obscured details, but I could make out a shape. Something bigger than the T-Rex. Something massive with a distinctive silhouette I couldn't quite identify. The unclear preservation suggested it had been even closer to whatever caused the flash freeze, caught in the epicenter, perhaps. There's something else back there, I said, pointing. Something large. The ice is too cloudy to see details. Raymond approached, straining to see what I was indicating. We'll need to explore deeper, map the entire cavern system. This might extend further than the radar indicated. His voice was full of awe, the kind of awe that overrides common sense and caution. Over the next 2 days, we catalogued the visible specimens, working in shifts to map the cavern. The work was painstaking, measuring, photographing, taking ice core samples near each specimen. We catalogued 37 distinct specimens in that first chamber, and the variety was staggering. Multiple species representing different ecological niches, different ages from juveniles to fully mature adults, all preserved perfectly. There were herbivores and carnivores, flyers and ground dwellers, a complete ecosystem frozen in time. The scientific implications were beyond measure, beyond anything we'd imagined when we first set out for this remote station. We could study dinosaur soft tissue, analyze their skin and feathers, examine their internal organs, potentially extract DNA. This discovery would revolutionize our understanding of prehistoric life, would answer questions we've been asking since the first dinosaur fossils were discovered nearly 2 centuries ago. The debates about what we were seeing continued late into each night. How had this happened? The leading theory involved some kind of localized climate catastrophe, perhaps a massive release of supercooled gas from underground vents, something that dropped the temperature so rapidly that even large animals froze solid before they could die of hypothermia. But that didn't explain why they'd all run to this specific location, unless they'd somehow sensed the danger and sought shelter in a place their instincts told them was safe. Or perhaps they'd been running from the cold itself, trying to escape, and this cavern had been a trap rather than a refuge. On May 21st, we made the decision that would doom us all, though we didn't know it then. We decided to extract a specimen to bring one of these perfectly preserved creatures to the surface for detailed study. We chose carefully, debating for hours about the ethics and the logistics. The largest specimens were too massive to move without heavy equipment we didn't have, too risky to attempt without proper infrastructure. We needed something manageable, something we could extract without causing damage, something that would give us maximum scientific value. We selected the smallest raptor, approximately 6 feet long from snout to tail tip. It was positioned in an accessible location, embedded in ice that appeared stable, and it was complete with no visible damage. It took 3 days to cut the ice block containing it, using heated wire saws to slice through the surrounding ice without damaging the specimen. The work was delicate, almost surgical. We cut with millimeter precision, constantly monitoring the temperature to ensure we weren't starting a premature thaw. The block, when we finally freed it, measured roughly 8 feet by 6 feet by 4 feet. It weighed close to 2 tons, a massive cube of ice with a 66-million-year-old predator at its center. Hoisting it to the surface was an engineering challenge that Henrik and our support crew solved with a system of pulleys and a portable winch. It took 6 hours to raise it through the tunnel, inch by careful inch, everyone holding their breath that the ropes wouldn't break, that the ice wouldn't fracture. On May 27th, we brought the ice block into the main laboratory and placed it in our largest containment chamber, a reinforced glass enclosure designed for studying core samples. The chamber was never meant to hold a living creature, but we didn't think we were dealing with a living creature. We thought we were studying a perfectly preserved corpse, a window into extinct biology. That's when we began the thaw, and that's when everything started to go wrong, though we didn't realize it immediately. The procedure was simple in concept, complex in execution. We needed to raise the temperature gradually, allowing the ice to melt slowly while maintaining environmental controls. Too fast, and we risked thermal shock damaging the tissue. Too slow, and we'd be waiting for weeks. We consulted with experts, ran simulations, calculated optimal rates. We set the chamber to increase 1 degree Celsius every 6 hours. At that rate, we estimate a complete thaw in approximately 5 days. It seemed safe, controlled, scientific. We'd done everything right, followed every protocol, taken every precaution. I volunteered for the first night shift, unable to stay away from the lab, compelled to watch every moment of the process. Liam set up cameras to record continuously, multiple angles with timestamps. This was history being made, and we wanted to capture every moment for posterity, for the scientific papers we'd write, for the documentaries that would follow. The first 3 days were exactly as expected, boring in the way controlled scientific processes are boring. The ice melted slowly, water collecting in the drainage system we'd installed, the containment chamber filling with a fine mist as the frozen water sublimated. Gradually, the ice became clear ice, then translucent ice, then transparent, revealing more and more of the creature within. It was beautiful in a deadly way, the kind of beauty that made your hindbrain recognize a predator even as your forebrain marveled at the elegant design. The feathers were a rusty red color, covering most of its body, except for the scaled legs and tail. Not scales like a lizard, but more like the scales on a bird's legs, thick and protective. The claws on its feet were curved and wickedly sharp, the killing claw on each foot particularly prominent, a 3-inch curved talon designed to slash and disembowel. Its teeth, visible through its partially open jaws, were serrated and designed for tearing flesh, each one a miniature steak knife. The eyes were closed, the lids dark and smooth. This was a predator, perfectly evolved for hunting and killing, a design refined over millions of years of evolution, and we were bringing it back, thawing it out like a frozen dinner. On day 3 of the thaw, May 30th, the specimen was fully visible through the remaining ice, every detail clear. Olivia took tissue samples from one of the exposed feet, the first to emerge completely from the ice. She used a micro drill to extract a small core of flesh, a cylinder of tissue no bigger than a pencil lead. The drill went through easily, the flesh yielding like raw chicken, not like fossilized bone or degraded tissue. She prepared the sample with hands that shook slightly, placing it on a slide, adding stains, making preparations. Then, she examined it under our electron microscope while I watched over her shoulder, both of us barely breathing. What we saw on the screen made my blood run cold. "Nathan, look at this," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement or fear. Perhaps both. The screen showed cellular structure in extraordinary detail, magnified thousands of times. The cells were intact, their walls unbroken, despite millions of years frozen. The organelles were still visible. The nucleus, the mitochondria, the internal architecture of life. But what caught our attention, what made us both lean closer to the screen, in disbelief, was something else entirely. "Is that electrical activity?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Minimal, but yes," Olivia said, adjusting the instruments to confirm what we were seeing. "The muscle tissue is showing bioelectric potential. There's a measurable charge across the cell membranes. Nathan, it's like the cells are dormant, not dead, like they're in some kind of suspended animation, just waiting for the right conditions to reactivate." Raymond, watching from across the lab, insisted it was impossible, just residual chemical reactions, artifacts of the preservation process. He rattled off explanations about mineral content, about electromagnetic properties of ice, about anything that could explain what we were seeing, without accepting the implications. But I wasn't sure. I'd seen enough in my career to know that nature had a way of defying our expectations and rewriting our understanding of what was possible. Life was more resilient, more adaptable, more persistent than we gave it credit for. I'd seen bacteria revive after thousands of years frozen in ice. I'd seen tardigrades survive conditions that should sterilize any life. But this was different. This was a complex organism, a vertebrate with millions of cells. It should be impossible. That night, June 1st, I took the solo watch shift, unable to sleep, driven by a mixture of excitement and growing unease. It was 2:34 in the morning. The station was quiet, most of the crew asleep. Only the hum of machinery and the howl of the wind outside breaking the silence. I sat in the dim laboratory watching the raptor through the containment glass and let my mind wander to places I usually kept locked away. I thought about Tommy, about his fascination with dinosaurs, the way his eyes lit up when we visited the Natural History Museum in Chicago. We'd gone 3 times in his short life, and each time he'd run straight to the fossil hall, to the massive skeletons towering overhead. His favourite was always the T-Rex, the way it towered over the main hall, its enormous skull suspended above visitors. He'd wanted to be a paleontologist when he grew up, wanted to discover new species and name them after himself. "Tommy Cross's dinosaur," he'd said, laughing. "That would be so cool, Dad. Then I can be famous like you." I told him I wasn't famous, that I was just a scientist doing his job, but he hadn't believed me. To him, anyone who studied dinosaurs was automatically the coolest person in the world. I never got to tell him about this discovery. He'd died before I took this assignment, before I'd run away to Greenland to escape the memories. But sitting there, watching this impossible creature slowly thaw after 66 million years. I felt closer to him than I had in months. This discovery was for him, I decided. Whatever came of it, whatever we learned, I'd dedicate it to his memory. The paper would have his name in the dedication. For Tommy Cross, who loved dinosaurs. That's when everything changed. The raptor's chest moved. I blinked, certain I'd imagined it. The low lighting, the late hour, my tired eyes playing tricks on me after days of minimal sleep. But then it happened again. Unmistakable this time. The ribcage rose, just slightly, maybe half an inch, then fell. The motion was slow, glacial even, but it was deliberate, organic. It was breathing. I hit the alarm without conscious thought, my hand slamming down on the button. The sound shattered the quiet, a harsh blaring that echoed through the entire station. Within 2 minutes, the lab was full of people in various states of sleepwear, everyone staring at the containment chamber in disbelief. Some had pulled on pants over pajamas, others wore heavy robes, hair messy from sleep. Emma arrived with her communications equipment ready to call for help. Jack came with his rifle, though what good a bullet would do against something that had been frozen for millions of years was unclear. "It moved," I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline surging through my system. "Its chest. It's breathing." "That's impossible," Raymond said, but his voice lacked conviction, the certainty draining from his words, even as he spoke them. He approached the glass slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might wake it further. Olivia rushed to the monitoring equipment we'd set up around the containment chamber, her fingers flying across the controls, activating sensors we'd installed to track temperature and humidity. What those sensors showed made her freeze, her face going pale. "I'm getting readings," she said, her voice filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. "Heartbeat, very slow, 3 beats per minute. No, wait, 4, 5, it's increasing." She'd pulled up the data on a monitor, and we all watched as the graph showed an unmistakable cardiac rhythm. We stared in stunned silence as the creature's vital signs appeared on the monitors in real time. Heart rate climbing slowly but steadily, each beat stronger than the last. Body temperature rising, independent of the ambient temperature in the chamber, generating heat from within through metabolic processes. Brain activity, minimal but present and growing stronger with each passing moment, neurons firing in ancient patterns. Henrik checked his sensors, his glaciologist expertise suddenly critical. The internal temperature of the specimen is increasing on its own. It started at -20 Celsius, now it's at -10 and climbing. It's generating heat internally. The metabolism is restarting. "Its cells are coming back online," Olivia said, her voice shaking with the implications. "The dormant cellular processes are reactivating. This isn't passive thawing, this is active revival. The cells are recognizing the temperature change and initiating metabolic processes. This is resurrection, Nathan. We're watching something that's been dead for 66 million years come back to life." Then the raptor's eyes opened, and everything we thought we understood about life and death shattered like the ice we'd pulled it from. Those eyes were nothing like a bird's, despite the feathers covering its body. They weren't the vacant eyes of a fish or the simple eyes of a reptile. They were predatory, calculating, aware in a way that made my primitive hindbrain scream in warning. This was the look of an apex predator, an intelligent hunter, evaluating its surroundings. The eyes tracked slowly across the lab, taking in the bright lights, the equipment, the group of humans staring at it. The movement was deliberate, analytical. When those eyes locked onto me, focused directly on my face, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. This creature was intelligent, more intelligent than any modern reptile. I could see it in those eyes, a sharp awareness that made every instinct I had scream danger, that made me want to run despite the reinforced glass between us. The raptor moved suddenly, explosively, fast as a striking snake. One moment it was still, the next it was in motion, covering the distance to the glass in a single bound. It lunged at the containment wall, claws extended, jaws open, in a shriek that made my teeth hurt and my ears ring. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard, part bird, part reptile, part something else entirely. A vocalization from a lost world. The reinforced glass, designed to withstand impacts and temperature extremes, cracked. A spiderweb fracture spread from the impact point, radiating outward in crystalline patterns. People screamed. Someone hit the emergency sedation release and gas flooded the containment chamber, a mixture of aerosolized tranquilizers designed for large animals. The raptor staggered, its movements becoming sluggish as the drugs hit its system. It took 3 steps toward the glass, each step more unsteady than the last, clawed at the fracture weakly with those terrible talons, then collapsed onto the chamber floor. We stood there in silence, staring at the unconscious creature, listening to its labored breathing through the speakers connected to the chamber's audio system. It had been fully alive for less than 3 minutes, and in that time, it had shattered every assumption we'd held about extinction, about death, about the limits of biological preservation. The heart monitor showed its pulse slowing as the sedatives took effect, dropping back down to a resting rate. But it was alive, genuinely, unmistakably alive, 66 million years dead, and we'd brought it back to life through nothing more than raising the temperature. "We need to discuss this," Raymond said finally, his voice shaky, his academic composure cracking. "Conference room, now, everyone." The meeting that followed was heated, voices raised, positions entrenched. Raymond saw this as vindication, proof that our research was groundbreaking, the discovery of the century that would cement our names in history. He paced the conference room, gesturing emphatically, talking about Nobel Prizes and paradigm shifts, about rewriting biology textbooks and revolutionizing our understanding of life. Henrik argued for caution, pointing out that we were not equipped to handle live dinosaurs, that our facility was designed for research and sample collection, not containment of dangerous animals. He wanted to refreeze the specimen immediately, stop the process before we lost control. Olivia was torn between scientific excitement and practical concern, wanting to study the creature but understanding the risks, her professional curiosity warring with common sense. The others chimed in with their opinions, the room filling with a cacophony of excited or fearful voices. I listened to them argue while watching the raptor through the lab's window, visible through the conference room's glass wall. It was still unconscious, but its chest continued to rise and fall in steady rhythm. We brought it back, 66 million years dead, frozen in ice before humans even existed, and we'd brought it back to life with nothing more than heat and time. "We should bring in a military containment team," I said, interrupting the argument, my voice cutting through the noise. "This is beyond our capability to handle safely. We're scientists, not zookeepers. We don't have the training or equipment to manage a living predator." "Absolutely not," Raymond said, his face flushing with anger or excitement, hard to tell which. "If we bring in outside authorities, military or otherwise, they'll take over. This is our discovery, Nathan. Ours. We made this happen. Do you know what this means? We can study living dinosaur biology. We can answer questions that fossils never could. We can observe behavior, study physiology, potentially unlock the secrets of their extinction. This is the greatest biological discovery in human history." "We can also get people killed," I countered, meeting his eyes. "That thing almost broke through reinforced glass designed to withstand polar bear attacks. What happens when it fully recovers? What happens if we can't sedate it fast enough next time? What happens when it learns the layout of this station and figures out we're made of meat?" Emma Valdez cleared her throat to get our attention, her expression grim. "We might not have a choice about outside help, or any help at all. There's a storm system moving in. A major one. It'll hit us in about 12 hours, and meteorology is predicting it'll last at least a week, possibly longer. We'll be completely cut off, no flights in or out, radio communication severely degraded to emergency channels only. Even those might not work if the storm is as bad as they're predicting. The room went silent as everyone absorbed this information. The implications were clear and terrifying. We were about to be isolated with a living dinosaur, alone on the ice with no possibility of rescue or reinforcement. Henrik stated the obvious, his voice flat. So we're stuck here with a living dinosaur for a week minimum, with no backup, no help, no way out. Raymond made the decision quickly, perhaps too quickly, his academic excitement overriding practical considerations. We continue the research, keep the specimens sedated on a regular schedule, maintain strict observation protocols around the clock. When the storm passes, we'll reassess our options and determine the best course forward, but we can't give up this opportunity. It might never come again. He called for a vote, the democratic process that governed research decisions. I voted against continuing. I was the only one. The vote was 13-1, in favour of proceeding with the research. Democracy had spoken, and we were committed to a course that my every instinct said was dangerous. That night, alone in my quarters, listening to the wind begin to pick up outside, I wrote in my journal. The pages filled with my cramped handwriting, describing the raptor's eyes, the intelligence I'd seen there that surpassed anything in modern reptiles. The way it had evaluated us, studied us through the glass, calculated its attack with precision, tested the barrier between us like an engineer looking for weaknesses. This wasn't a simple animal operating on pure instinct. This was an apex predator with 66 million years of evolution backing it up, with problem-solving intelligence that rivaled many modern mammals, perhaps even rivaled dolphins or primates. I had a bad feeling about what came next, a sense of dread that settled in my gut like a stone and wouldn't leave. But I was outvoted, and the storm was coming. And we were committed now, trapped by our own curiosity and ambition. The storm hit the next morning, June 2nd, coming in fast like a white wall of fury, rolling across the ice. Visibility dropped to zero in a matter of hours. The wind howled around the station, driving snow against the windows with a sound like thrown sand, a constant assault that made the buildings creak and groan. We were officially cut off from the outside world, isolated in our little bubble of warmth and light surrounded by hundreds of miles of frozen wasteland. And Raymond made another decision that would seal our fate, though we didn't see it at the time. We should bring up more specimens, he announced at breakfast, while we huddled around hot coffee and tried to ignore the storm's fury rattling the windows. If we can document multiple revivals, multiple species, the discovery becomes absolutely undeniable. The scientific community can't dismiss it as a fluke, or contamination, or experimental error if we have consistent results across different animals, different species, different preservation conditions. I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor, the metal legs screeching. "Are you insane?" I asked, not caring that I was challenging the station director in front of everyone. "We can barely contain one raptor. It nearly broke through reinforced glass on its first attempt. And now you want to bring up more, multiple specimens." Raymond met my anger with calm determination, his professorial demeanor intact. "We have multiple containment chambers that we're not currently using, Nathan. We can expand the lab space, set up additional monitoring equipment, increase security protocols. I understand your concerns, I do, but this opportunity might never come again. Climate change is melting these ice sheets. In 10 years, 20 years, this cavern might be exposed naturally, or it might collapse, or the specimens might degrade. We have to take advantage of it while we can, document everything while we have the chance." The vote went his way again, but the margin was narrower this time. 10 to 5. More people were getting nervous, understanding the risks, but not enough to stop the momentum of discovery. Over the next 48 hours, while the storm raged outside like an angry god trying to break into our sanctuary, we brought 3 more specimens to the surface through that narrow tunnel. The work was harder in the storm, the wind trying to rip equipment from our hands, snow filling the access shaft. But we persisted, driven by scientific curiosity and human stubbornness. 2 more raptors positioned close together in the cavern, which Olivia theorized might be from the same pack based on their proximity and similar size. Pack hunters, I thought. That's wonderful. Just what we need. Social predators that hunt cooperatively. And 1 juvenile Triceratops, approximately 12 feet long and weighing around 3 tons. It was smaller than the adults in the cavern, which made it theoretically manageable, but it was still a massive animal with 3 horns designed for combat. Each horn capable of goring a predator, and a beak that could shear through tough plant matter or flesh with equal ease. By June 4th, we had 4 prehistoric creatures thawing in our laboratory, 4 species that had been extinct for 66 million years, coming back to life in a research station in Greenland, cut off from all outside help by a storm that showed no signs of abating. The wind continued unabated, the snow piling up against our buildings in massive drifts. I couldn't sleep anymore. I spent my nights walking the station's corridors, checking locks, reviewing containment protocols, looking for weaknesses in our security that a clever predator might exploit. The storm continued its assault outside, the wind screaming like something alive and angry, battering at our walls as if trying to get in or warn us about what we brought inside. All 4 specimens were showing signs of revival now. Metabolic rates increasing steadily, body temperatures climbing degree by degree, movement in their containment chambers becoming more frequent and purposeful. The Triceratops opened its eyes on the 2nd day and made a deep, bellowing sound that resonated through the entire station, vibrating in my chest like a bass drum. It sounded lonely, a call for others of its kind that would never be answered because its entire species had been dead for longer than mammals had dominated the earth. Somehow that made it even more unsettling, more sad. The 3 raptors were more disturbing to watch. They were becoming increasingly active, testing their enclosures with what I was certain was deliberate intent, rather than random animal behavior. They would press against the glass with their snouts, probe for weaknesses with their claws, retreat and try different approaches, shift strategies based on results. One would distract by making noise while another tested a different section of the containment in coordinated attacks. They were coordinating, communicating through subtle movements and soft chirping sounds, whistles and clicks that might be language for all we knew. Olivia stood beside me at the observation window one evening, watching their behavior with growing concern etched on her face. "They're problem-solving," she said quietly, as if afraid speaking loudly might attract their attention. "Look at that behavior, the way they're working together. That's not instinct alone, Nathan. That's intelligence, cognition, maybe even planning. They're working together systematically to find a way out, learning the limitations of their prison, testing every possible weakness, adapting their strategies based on what works and what doesn't." Liam captured it all, on video, his camera becoming an extension of his body. The footage he got over those days was extraordinary and terrifying in equal measure. Living dinosaurs, their movements fluid and purposeful, their behavior complex and adaptive, their intelligence unmistakable. This was documentation that would change science forever, that would force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about extinct life and the nature of intelligence in reptilian brains, assuming any of us survived to share it. On June 4th, Olivia made a discovery that turned my unease into genuine, bone-deep fear. She'd been analysing tissue samples from all 4 specimens, comparing their cellular structure, looking for commonalities and differences that might explain their remarkable preservation. The results made no biological sense according to everything we understood about how life worked, how cells functioned, how DNA operated. She found me in the cafeteria at dinner, trying to force down some food that tasted like cardboard in my mouth, and pulled me aside to the lab. Her hands were shaking as she pulled up the microscope images on the computer. "Their cells are adapting," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Look at these comparison images. This is tissue from the first raptor, taken 3 days ago. This is tissue from the same raptor taken this morning. See the difference?" I leaned closer to the screen, studying the cellular structures. They were different, subtly but unmistakably. The cell walls had thickened. New protein structures had formed. The mitochondria had increased in number and efficiency. "The ancient DNA is recognizing the modern atmosphere," Olivia continued. "The different oxygen levels, the ambient temperature, the environmental conditions, and it's changing, compensating, rewriting itself in real time. Nathan, this is evolution compressed into hours instead of millennia. Their bodies are literally adapting as we watch, adjusting to conditions they haven't experienced in 66 million years." "How is that possible?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "I don't know," she admitted, pulling up more images, showing the progression. "The genetic structures are like nothing I've ever seen in any living organism, modern or extinct. It's as if these creatures were designed to survive, engineered to adapt rapidly to changing conditions beyond what natural selection should allow. Maybe that's how they survived the initial catastrophe that froze them. Maybe they were already adapting when the ice took them, their bodies desperately trying to adjust to rapidly changing climate conditions, to temperature swings and atmospheric changes, and that adaptation mechanism has remained intact, dormant but functional, waiting to be triggered." That evening, at 8:47 p.m. by the lab clock, while most of us were trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine, the lead raptor made its move. I was in the cafeteria, trying to force down some food that tasted like ash, when the alarm went off. The sound was different this time, not the general alert, but the specific containment breach alarm that we'd all hoped never to hear. A shrieking siren that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. We ran to the lab, our footsteps echoing through the corridors, fear making us clumsy and desperate. The scene that greeted us was chaos incarnate, a nightmare made real. The lead raptor, the first one we'd thawed, had been systematically working on the crack in its containment glass. We'd reinforced it after the initial incident, added additional layers of polymer sealant, applied emergency repairs. But the creature had been patient and methodical, spending hours studying the repair, finding its weaknesses. It had found the weak point, the junction where old glass met new sealant, the microscopic gap in our defences, and it had exploited that weakness with the precision of an engineer, using its claws like tools, its intelligence like a weapon. The containment chamber stood empty, door hanging open, gas venting uselessly into the lab through broken seals. The raptor was gone, vanished into the station's infrastructure, like a ghost. Raymond initiated emergency lockdown without hesitation. Blast doors dropped throughout the station with heavy metallic thuds that echoed through the corridors, sealing sections from each other, compartmentalizing the facility. The 15 of us were scattered across different areas, some trapped alone, others in small groups. I was in the lab section with Henrik, Emma, and 2 technicians named Sophie Chen and David Park. The 5 of us stared at each other in the flashing red emergency lights, all thinking the same thing, but not wanting to say it aloud. We were trapped with a prehistoric predator that was hunting us. Emma's whisper cut through the alarms blaring. "Where did it go? How did it get out so fast?" Henrik pulled up the security camera feeds on his tablet. his fingers shaking slightly as he scrolled through different views, checking each camera in sequence. He said he wasn't seeing it in any of the main corridors, checking room by room, his face growing paler as he realized what that meant. Wait, there. He pointed at a grainy image showing a ventilation grate hanging open, bent outward from the inside, the metal twisted with force that should be impossible for an animal that size. It's in the vent system. The ventilation at Glacier Station Epsilon was designed for efficiency, not security. The ducts were large enough for maintenance access, which meant they were large enough for a 6-foot raptor to navigate. We'd never considered that a threat, never imagined we'd need to defend against an intelligent predator moving through our infrastructure. The creature could be anywhere in the station now, could be watching us through any of the dozens of grates and vents. It could move through the walls, drop from the ceiling without warning, emerge from any of dozens of access panels we didn't even think about in normal operations. We were trapped in a confined space with a prehistoric predator that was actively hunting us, and we'd given it perfect cover. For the next 3 hours we huddled in the lab, monitoring the security feeds with growing dread, trying to track the raptor's location through brief glimpses and shadows. We caught sight of it occasionally, a flash of rusty feathers in a corridor, the brief outline of its distinctive profile near the storage bays, the glint of an eye reflecting infrared light from a camera. But mostly we saw nothing, just empty corridors, and the knowledge that it was out there somewhere. It was learning the station's layout, and that terrified me more than anything. This wasn't random wandering or panicked flight. This was methodical exploration, systematic searching, the behavior of an intelligent predator mapping its territory. The intelligence was undeniable now, impossible to dismiss or rationalize away. This was a thinking, planning creature that understood it was in an enclosed space with prey and was figuring out how to reach that prey most efficiently. At 11:32 p.m. by the security timestamp, it found its first victim, and we watched it happen on the grainy security footage, helpless to intervene. Sophie had volunteered to make a run to the emergency supply locker in the next section, barely 30 feet away through a sealed door. We needed the tranquilizer rifles stored there, the ones meant for defending against polar bears, our only real weapons. We'd argued about it for 20 minutes, but she'd insisted, young and brave and not fully understanding what she was facing. She was fast, athletic, a former college track runner, and the route seemed clear on the cameras, every corridor empty, no sign of the raptor anywhere in that section. We gave her the go-ahead, watching nervously on multiple screens as she entered the storage bay. She moved quickly, efficiently, heading for the lockers at the far end, where the weapons were stored. She was almost there, maybe 10 feet from safety and salvation, when the raptor dropped from the ceiling vent directly above her. We hadn't even known there was a vent there, hadn't been watching that angle. The attack was savage and fast, over in seconds. The raptor struck her from behind, its killing claw, that distinctive sickle-shaped talon on its foot, slashing across her back in a precise strike that severed her spine. Sophie went down hard, tried to scream, but the sound was cut off as the raptor's jaws closed on her throat with terrible precision, crushing her windpipe, severing the carotid artery. Blood sprayed across the white floor in stark crimson patterns that looked like some grotesque modern art. Emma turned away, her hand over her mouth, making choking sounds as she fought not to vomit. David made a strangled noise of horror, his face going pale. Henrik and I just watched, frozen in our helplessness, unable to do anything but bear witness, as the raptor fed on Sophie's body. The creature wasn't just killing for defense or territory, wasn't acting in fear or confusion. It was eating, tearing flesh with those serrated teeth, consuming its kill. After 66 million years frozen in time, it was hungry, starving after an incomprehensible fast, and it had found prey, Soft, slow, easy prey that didn't fight back effectively, that didn't have horns or armor, or the ability to flee at high speed. When it was done, leaving Sophie's mutilated corpse on the storage room floor in a spreading pool of blood, the raptor looked directly at the security camera. Those intelligent eyes seemed to stare right through the lens, right at us, watching from our supposed safety. It was studying us, learning about us, understanding that we could see it through the cameras. Then it turned deliberately and disappeared back into the ventilation system, vanishing like a ghost, leaving us with nothing but a corpse and the knowledge that we were next. "We need to reach the others," I said, my voice hoarse from fear and adrenaline. "We need to get to the main lab and sedate the other specimens before they wake up fully. And we have 4 of these things loose instead of 1. 3 more raptors and a 3-ton Triceratops running loose would be a death sentence for all of us." Henrik stated the obvious problem, his voice hollow with despair. "The raptor is between us and the main lab. We can't get there directly without crossing through sections it's actively hunting in. It'll pick us off one by one if we try the main corridors." "Then we go around," I said, formulating a desperate plan, "through the maintenance tunnels that run beneath the main corridors. They're narrow, cramped, but they connect all the major sections. If we're careful, if we're quiet, maybe we can get there without it detecting us." It was a desperate plan, born of panic and few options. The 4 of us, armed with nothing but fire extinguishers and improvised weapons, were about to venture into the station's underbelly to reach the lab before everything fell apart completely. We gathered what supplies we could find: flashlights, a crowbar, a fire axe, Emma's radio. Not much against the prehistoric killing machine, but better than nothing. We moved through the narrow maintenance corridors, crawling through spaces barely wide enough for our shoulders, our breath coming in harsh gasps that seemed terribly loud in the confined spaces. The tunnels were dark, our headlamps creating bouncing circles of illumination that made shadows jump and twist into threatening shapes. Pipes ran along the walls, cables hung from the ceiling, and every inch was covered in a fine layer of dust that we disturbed with our passage. Every sound made us freeze in place, hearts pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Every creak of metal, every groan of the structure in the wind, every drip of condensation could be the raptor stalking us through parallel ducts, hunting us in the darkness. We moved in single file, Henrik in front because he knew the layout best, me bringing up the rear, watching behind us for any sign of pursuit. It took us 40 minutes to reach the access panel that led to the main lab. 40 minutes of crawling through darkness while knowing a prehistoric killer could be inches away on the other side of thin metal walls, could burst through at any moment with claws and teeth. Henrik carefully unscrewed the access panel with hands that shook from fear and exertion, each turn of the screwdriver seeming impossibly loud. The rest of us watched the darkness behind us, expecting at any moment to see those predatory eyes reflecting in our lights, to hear that terrible shriek, to feel claws tearing into flesh. We emerged into the main lab to find Jack Torres there, our security officer, and the sight of him alive was like a miracle. He had the rifle, the big game rifle meant for polar bears, and the sight of that weapon was the most reassuring thing I'd seen in hours. He'd barricaded himself in when the alarm sounded, had been waiting, hoping others would make it to this secured location. But what we saw in the containment chambers killed any hope I'd felt growing in my chest, crushed it like the raptor had crushed Sophie's throat. The 3 remaining specimens were awake, fully conscious and increasingly agitated. All 3 raptors were on their feet, pacing their enclosures with predatory grace, testing the glass with their snouts, their claws, looking for weaknesses they could exploit like their packmate had. The Triceratops was bellowing, its head lowered, smashing its horns against the reinforced glass with impacts that shook the floor and sent vibrations through the walls. Cracks were spreading across multiple containment units, spiderweb fractures that grew larger with each impact. The glass wouldn't hold much longer. An hour, maybe 2 at most. Olivia was already there, along with Liam, who was filming despite the chaos, documenting our impending doom with the dedication of a true filmmaker. Raymond was there too, but he looked like he was in shock, his face pale and his hands shaking, his academic confidence completely shattered by the reality of what we'd unleashed. He kept muttering about protocols and procedures, about controlled scientific observation, as if any of that mattered now. Olivia told us we needed to sedate them immediately, her voice urgent and afraid. The containment wouldn't hold much longer, and once they got out, we were all dead. There was no question about that. We prepared the sedative doses with fumbling, adrenaline-clumsy fingers, loading them into the injection system built into the containment chambers. The plan was simple in theory. Flood the chambers with aerosolized sedative, knock the specimens out and figure out what to do next. Buy ourselves time to think, to plan, to maybe survive long enough for the storm to pass, and rescue to arrive. We were loading the second dose, hands shaking, when the loose raptor attacked from above. It had followed us somehow, tracked us through the station, perhaps followed our scent, or the sound of our passage through the maintenance tunnels. Maybe it had been waiting for us to gather in one location, hunting us with strategy and patience. It came from a ceiling vent none of us had noticed, a vent too small for it to fit through, except it had somehow forced its way in, bending the metal, compressing its body. The grate crashed down with a metallic clang that made everyone jump. It landed on Jack with its full weight, knocking him to the ground with crushing force. He managed to get one shot off, the rifle's report deafening. In the enclosed lab, the sound so loud it felt like a physical blow. But the shot went wide, impacting the wall, missing the raptor by inches. Then the creature's jaws were at Jack's throat, and he died fast, efficiently. The raptor's bite crushing his windpipe and severing his spine simultaneously. His life ended in a spray of arterial blood that painted the walls and floor. The gunshot, though, had consequences we couldn't have anticipated. The bullet struck the containment chamber holding one of the other raptors, hitting right where the glass was already compromised by the creature's constant attacks. The reinforced barrier shattered explosively, safety glass spraying across the lab in a glittering cascade. The raptor inside screamed in what sounded like triumph, a vocalization that raised every hair on my body, and launched itself through the opening with terrifying speed. Behind it, the second raptor, seeing its packmate escape, smashed through its own compromised containment with renewed fury, understanding that freedom was possible. 3 raptors now, all loose, all very much alive and very hungry after their long fast. We ran without thinking, without planning, pure survival instinct taking over, the most basic programming in the human brain activated. We scattered like prey animals before a pack of wolves, each person making for the nearest exit in blind panic. I grabbed Olivia's arm, pulled her toward the emergency door, her smaller frame, making it hard for her to keep up with my longer strides. Liam was right behind us, camera still rolling somehow, his journalistic instincts overriding his survival instincts, documenting even in the face of death. Emma managed to stay with our group, her hand clutching my jacket as we ran. We made it into the corridor and slammed the door shut behind us, the heavy metal providing momentary safety, a thin barrier between us and the raptors. Through the small reinforced window, we saw one of the raptors turn toward us, its head cocking to the side as it studied the door, evaluated whether we were worth pursuing. It considered for a long moment, then turned back to where Henrik, David, and Raymond were trapped on the other side of the lab, choosing easier prey over pursuing us through a barrier. It had made a calculated decision showing intelligence and strategic thinking that no animal should possess. We sealed the section, activated the blast doors with shaking hands, heavy metal panels dropping with hydraulic hisses. It was all we could do, our only option. We'd isolated the lab, containing the immediate threat, but that meant Henrik, David, and Raymond were trapped in there with 3 raptors and a very angry Triceratops that was still smashing its containment. The screams that came through the door didn't last long, maybe 30 seconds that felt like hours, the sounds of terror and agony, muffled but unmistakable. Then, silence, terrible and complete, the kind of silence that speaks of death and loss. The 4 of us, Olivia, Liam, Emma and I, made our way to the station's communication centre. It was the most secure location designed to withstand extreme weather and maintain contact with the outside world, even in the worst conditions. The walls were reinforced, the door was thick metal with multiple locks. If we could hold out there, if we could somehow boost the emergency signal through the storm, maybe we had a chance. We'd lost 8 people now, 8 out of 15 in less than 12 hours. Sophie, Jack, Henrik, David, Raymond, and 3 others we'd lost contact with during the chaos, presumably dead in sealed sections or killed while fleeing. The station had become a nightmare of locked doors and roaming predators, a maze of death where every corridor might hide a killer from the Cretaceous. As we barricaded ourselves in the comm centre, piling equipment against the door, wedging chairs under the handle, doing anything we could think of to reinforce our position, I thought about Raymond's enthusiasm earlier. His certainty that this discovery would make history, that we would be remembered forever for bringing back extinct life. He'd been right about that. We'd made history, learned that extinction wasn't permanent, that death could be reversed with the right conditions, that life was more persistent than we'd imagined. And we'd learned why some things should stay dead, why nature had buried these creatures under miles of ice for 66 million years, why extinction exists as a mercy to future species. The night passed slowly, each minute stretching into an eternity. We could hear sounds through the station's walls, thuds and crashes as the dinosaurs explored their new territory with the curiosity of intelligent animals in a new environment. The Triceratops had broken out of the lab at some point, its footsteps shaking the floor as it moved through corridors never designed for something so massive. We heard its bellowing calls echoing through the corridors, a sound that spoke of confusion and distress, a creature utterly lost in time and space. At dawn on June 6th, with the storm finally beginning to clear, Liam spotted something through the reinforced window that made him gasp and call us over urgently. The storm had cleared enough to see outside for the first time in days, and what we saw changed everything, made us realize the scope of the catastrophe we'd unleashed. Dinosaurs. Outside the station, not just the raptors or the Triceratops, but others, larger ones that hadn't been in our lab, that had emerged from the cavern on their own. The juvenile T-Rex had emerged from the cavern access tunnel at some point during the chaos. It stood in the snow 30 yards from the station, its massive head raised, breathing the Arctic air for the first time in millions of years. Its breath created clouds of vapor in the cold air. As we watched in stunned silence, unable to fully process what we were seeing, it began to walk away from the station, its movements steady and purposeful. Despite the sub-zero temperature, despite the alien environment, it was surviving, adapting, living in conditions no dinosaur should be able to tolerate. Olivia's voice was filled with awe and horror in equal measure. "They're leaving," she said, her face pressed against the glass. "They're actually surviving out there in temperatures that should kill them." Henrik's words came back to me, his analysis of their cellular adaptation, the way their bodies were evolving in real time. The creatures were built to survive in cold climates. Their metabolism, their feathered covering, their rapid evolutionary compensation. The Arctic wasn't an obstacle to them. It was a new hunting ground. Virgin territory, full of prey that had never evolved defenses against apex predators from the Cretaceous period: seals, polar bears, caribou, all of them easy prey for creatures designed to hunt much more dangerous animals. Emma worked frantically with the communication equipment, her fingers flying over controls she knew intimately, trying to boost our emergency signal through the atmospheric interference. The storm had degraded to light snow, enough that aircraft could potentially reach us if they knew we were here, if we could get a message out through the interference. After an hour of adjustments and frequency scanning, she suddenly shouted that she had something, her voice cracking with relief. "Weak signal, but I'm getting through to the Icelandic Coast Guard. I have contact." She sent our distress call, explaining our situation in the most clinical terms possible, choosing her words carefully, aware that what we said would be recorded and analysed. Research station, catastrophic accident, multiple casualties, require immediate evacuation, critical emergency, multiple fatalities. She didn't mention dinosaurs. Who would have believed us? They'd think we were delusional from isolation and stress, that we'd gone mad in the Arctic darkness. The Coast Guard confirmed receipt of our signal and said they'd dispatch rescue as soon as the weather permitted, which they estimated at several hours minimum. The storm was clearing, but conditions were still dangerous for flight. We just had to survive until then, just had to hold our position and wait for salvation that might come too late. That's when the Spinosaurus broke through the outer wall, and we realized the nightmare wasn't close to over, wasn't even approaching its climax. We'd forgotten about it in the chaos, the massive shape we'd seen deep in the ice behind the T-Rex. It had thawed along with everything else, warming gradually in the cavern as heat from our excavation spread through the ice, as the temperature rose degree by degree. And it was larger than any specimen we'd documented, bigger than we'd imagined possible, a creature that shouldn't have existed in the Arctic but did. 18 feet tall, at the head with a distinctive sail along its back that made it look even more massive and alien. A Spinosaurus, a species that shouldn't have been in the Arctic at all during the Cretaceous period, a creature from North Africa that somehow ended up frozen in Greenland. But there it was, and it was coming for us, drawn by the sounds and vibrations of prey, by the smell of blood and fear that permeated the station. The creature's massive head pushed through the hole it had made in the station's insulated wall, metal and insulation tearing like paper under its strength. It couldn't fit entirely through, its shoulders too wide for the breach it had created, but it didn't need to. That enormous mouth filled with conical teeth, designed for catching fish but capable of crushing bone, snapped at anything within reach. The comm center shook with each impact as the creature tried to force its way inside, determined to reach the prey it had scented. I shouted over the sound of tearing metal that we had to get to the equipment hangar. It was the only section with independent structural integrity, built to withstand the worst Arctic storms, constructed more solidly than the rest of the station. If we could reach it, we might survive long enough for rescue to arrive. It was our last hope, our final refuge. We ran through the station one last time, a desperate flight through corridors that were falling apart around us, through sections that were collapsing under the assault of creatures that shouldn't exist. Behind us, the Spinosaurus demolished the wall further, its roars shaking the entire structure, determined to reach the prey it had scented after millions of years of frozen hunger. The raptors were there too, drawn by our movement and the commotion, by the sound of running prey. We could hear them calling to each other, those chirping vocalizations that meant they were coordinating their attack, planning their strategy. Pack hunters working together to corner prey using tactics refined over millions of years of evolution, using intelligence that rivaled any predator that had ever lived. We were halfway to the hangar, running through what used to be the living quarters when one of them caught Olivia. It came from a side corridor with the speed of a striking snake, too fast to avoid or counter even if we'd been expecting it. Its killing claw caught her leg just above the knee, severing muscle and tendons with surgical precision, cutting through flesh like a blade through silk. She went down hard, screaming in pain and terror, blood spraying across the white floor in stark crimson patterns that looked like some grotesque painting. I didn't think, couldn't afford the luxury of rational thought. I just reacted on pure instinct, on the primal human drive to protect, to save. I grabbed her under the arms and dragged her backward with strength I didn't know I had, adrenaline making me stronger. Liam and Emma tried to distract the raptor, shouting and waving their arms, throwing anything they could grab. The creature hissed at us, its throat inflating, feinted an attack that made Emma stumble back against the wall. Then it retreated strategically, backing away rather than pressing its advantage. It wasn't attacking to kill anymore, wasn't going for the throat. It was herding us, driving us towards its packmates in a coordinated hunting strategy, the same tactics wolves use against elk. We made it to the hangar, with Olivia barely conscious from blood loss and shock, her face pale as death, her breathing shallow and rapid. The heavy door sealed behind us with a solid thunk that provided momentary relief. The sound of safety, however, temporary. Henrik was there somehow, bloodied but alive, which seemed like a miracle given what we'd heard through the lab door. He'd escaped the lab somehow through a maintenance hatch, had made it through the chaos by sheer luck and determination and will to survive. He helped me carry Olivia inside while Emma and Liam sealed the door behind us, throwing every lock, engaging every security measure, barricading it with everything we could move. The hangar held 2 snowmobiles and emergency survival supplies stored in clearly marked lockers, our potential escape route if we could reach the outside, if we could get away from the station, if we could reach open ground where the raptors couldn't corner us. Maybe we had a chance of survival, however slim. Raymond was there too, sitting in the corner. But he was different, changed in some fundamental way by what he'd seen and done. He sat alone, staring at nothing, muttering about his research, about the discovery we'd made, about responsibility and consequences. His mind had broken under the weight of what he'd unleashed, the guilt and horror too much for his psyche to handle. "We have to document it," he kept saying, his voice monotone and distant, his eyes unfocused. "The world needs to know what we found. We brought them back. We brought them back from extinction. We proved it was possible. That has to mean something." He was rocking slightly, his hands clasped together. "Raymond, we need to leave," I said, approaching him carefully like you would approach a frightened animal, keeping my voice calm and steady. "We need to evacuate now. The helicopters are coming. We can get out of here." He looked at me with eyes that didn't quite focus, didn't quite see me, looking through me at something only he could perceive. No, I need to seal the tunnel. Trap them down there. Keep them contained. The ones still in the cavern." He stood up, pulled out a detonator from his pocket with shaking hands, and I realized he'd been planning this, had prepared for this possibility weeks ago when we first excavated. I planted charges when we first opened the tunnel, safety measure, standard protocol for ice excavation. I can collapse it, bury them again, stop this from spreading. "Raymond, that won't help us now," I said, reaching out to him. "They're already out. They're already loose. Collapsing the tunnel won't change that." "But the others," he said, his voice rising with desperate intensity. "The ones still in the cavern. All those specimens we documented. 37 species, maybe more deeper in. If they thaw, if they all wake up, this will spread beyond anything we can imagine. Beyond containment. They'll breed, spread across the Arctic, maybe beyond. This is an extinction event in reverse, Nathan. We've brought back the age of reptiles." He was backing towards the interior door. the one that led deeper into the station towards the access tunnel. I have to stop them. This is my responsibility. My fault. I pushed for this. I made this happen. Before any of us could stop him, before we could reach him or talk him down, he opened the door and ran into the station, detonator clutched in his hand like a talisman. That was the last time we saw Raymond Holt alive. Whether he made it to the tunnel or whether the raptors caught him first, we'll never know. Henrik got the snowmobiles running while I did my best to treat Olivia's leg with supplies from the emergency medical kit. The wound was horrific. Bone visible through the torn flesh. Blood still seeping despite the pressure bandage I'd applied with shaking hands. The raptor's claw had cut clean through, severing the femoral artery partially. She'd needed a hospital, surgery, blood transfusions, antibiotics, professional medical care. What I could offer was battlefield first aid and desperate hope that it would be enough to keep her alive until real help arrived. "I'm sorry," I told her as I worked, my hands covered in her blood, unable to meet her eyes. I should have pushed harder against bringing them up. I should have refused to participate. I should have stopped this somehow. Olivia's voice was weak but steady, her hand gripping mine with surprising strength. "We all made the choice, Nathan. We all wanted to see, to know, to understand. The human drive for knowledge led us here. This isn't on you alone. This is on all of us. We wanted to touch the impossible, and we did." A massive explosion rocked the station, the sound rolling through the structure like thunder, shaking the ground beneath our feet. Raymond had detonated his charges, collapsing the access tunnel in a cascade of ice and rock and ancient frozen water. Whether he'd been in it at the time, whether he'd gotten clear, whether he'd chosen to stay and be buried with the specimens he'd helped awaken, we'd never know. The tunnel was gone, sealed forever, tons of ice collapsing into the cavern below. The remaining specimens would stay frozen, would never wake, would sleep for another 1,000,000 years until the ice melted naturally. Henrik's voice was urgent as he told us it was time to go, right now, before the whole structure came down around us or the raptors broke through our barricades. We got Olivia onto one snowmobile with difficulty, Emma driving with her passenger, secured behind her with bungee cords from the emergency supplies. Henrik, Liam, and I took the second machine, Liam clutching his camera equipment even in our desperate flight, still documenting even as we fled for our lives. We opened the hangar's exterior door, and cold Arctic air rushed in like a living thing, minus 30 degrees Celsius, hitting us like a physical blow. We accelerated into the dawn light, leaving behind the ruins of Glacier Station Epsilon. Behind us, the station was collapsing, multiple sections on fire despite the cold, smoke rising into the pale sky like a funeral pyre. And among the ruins, we could see them clearly now in the growing light of dawn. The dinosaurs, emerging into their new world like ghosts from a forgotten age, like demons from a lost hell. The raptors moved as a group, 6 of them now visible in the snow. They'd freed others from the cavern, or found more we hadn't documented, had released their packmates. They stood in the snow watching us go with those intelligent, calculating eyes that promised this wasn't over, that they would remember us, that they would hunt. The Triceratops lumbered past them, paying them no attention in a scene that would have been impossible in the Cretaceous. Predator and prey united in their confusion at this strange new environment, temporarily suspending their ancient dynamic in the face of greater strangeness. And the Spinosaurus, massive and terrible, pulled itself fully from the wreckage of the station. It raised its head and roared, a sound that echoed across the ice sheet for miles. A challenge, or a declaration, or simply a celebration of being alive after so long dead. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in the modern world, that hadn't been heard on Earth for 66 million years. We drove for 3 hours through whiteout conditions that came and went, Olivia's consciousness fading in and out as shock set in, and her body tried to cope with the trauma. She'd wake with a gasp, then drift away again. All of us were frostbitten, exhausted beyond measure, running on pure adrenaline and survival instinct, and the animal will to live. We were following the emergency beacon coordinates programmed into the snowmobile's GPS, heading for the designated rescue zone 5 miles from the station. The raptors followed us for the first hour, keeping pace easily, 6 shadows moving through the snow with deadly grace. We could see them in our mirrors, dark shapes against the white, never falling behind, testing whether we were worth the energy of a continued hunt. Eventually they fell back, perhaps finding easier prey among the Arctic wildlife. Seals hauled out on the ice or caribou migrating across the tundra. Or perhaps deciding we weren't worth the effort, that there was easier food than strange-tasting primates fleeing on noisy machines. But I'll never forget the sight of them moving across the ice with that deadly grace, perfectly adapted predators, in a world that thought them extinct for 66 million years. They weren't clumsy or slow, like the old movie suggested. They were efficient, graceful, beautiful, in the way apex predators are beautiful, the way a shark or a wolf is beautiful. Perfectly designed killing machines. And now they were loose in the 21st century. The helicopter found us at 2:15 in the afternoon, appearing through the snow like salvation itself. But it wasn't the Icelandic Coast Guard we'd contacted, wasn't the civilian rescue we'd expected. It was military, an unmarked black aircraft with no visible insignia, with soldiers in Arctic gear who secured us with efficiency that spoke of extensive training and preparation. They knew what they were looking for, what they were dealing with. Someone had briefed them, warned them, told them what they'd find. They loaded us into the helicopter without questions, without small talk, their movements practiced and professional, treating us like dangerous cargo rather than victims. One of them, a medic with a face that showed no emotion, worked on Olivia's leg during the flight with skill that suggested combat experience, field medicine in war zones. Another collected Liam's camera equipment, confiscating it without explanation or legal justification, just taking it as if they had every right, as if our documentation belonged to them now. We were taken to a military facility in Iceland, somewhere remote and unmarked that I couldn't identify even if I wanted to. Isolated, windowless rooms that felt more like cells than hospital wards. Concrete walls and locked doors and cameras in every corner. Medical examinations that were thorough to the point of invasive, checking us for contamination or infection, or something they never quite specified, taking blood samples and tissue samples and asking questions about what we'd touched, what we'd been exposed to, interrogations that they called debriefings, hours upon hours of questions about what we'd seen, what we'd done, what we'd unleashed, asking the same questions in different ways, looking for inconsistencies, testing our stories. For 2 months we were separated, kept in isolation like plague victims or dangerous criminals. I didn't see Olivia, Henrik, Emma or Liam during that entire time. I was alone with my thoughts, my memories, my nightmares that grew worse as the days passed in that windowless cell. The nightmares were the worst part of captivity, worse than the isolation or the interrogations. I'd see Tommy, alive and smiling, running toward me with his arms outstretched. Then he'd change, transform, his skin becoming scaled, his eyes going cold and reptilian, his hands becoming claws. He'd open his mouth to speak, and a raptor's shriek would come out. I'd see the raptor's eyes staring at me with that terrible intelligence that promised it was still out there, still hunting, still remembering the soft humans who'd freed it. I'd hear Sophie's cut-off scream echoing endlessly. I'd see Jack's desperate last stand, the single shot that missed its target and doomed us all. I'd hear Raymond's mutterings about responsibility and redemption as he walked to his death. When they finally released me 3 months after the incident, it was with conditions that made it clear this would never be publicly acknowledged, that the truth would be buried as deep as the dinosaurs had been. Non-disclosure agreements signed under threat of prosecution for violating national security, legal documents that threatened prison time and financial ruin if I ever spoke about what had happened, psychiatric evaluation that diagnosed me with severe PTSD and acute stress disorder, effectively discrediting anything I might say about the events, making me an unreliable witness in the eyes of any court or journalist. Medication that I didn't take because it made the memories fuzzy and indistinct, and I needed to remember clearly, needed to remember every detail. I needed to bear witness to what we'd done, even if I couldn't speak about it openly, even if the world would never officially know. The official story was simple and neat, perfect in its mundane believability. Glacier Station Epsilon suffered catastrophic structural failure during an unprecedented storm, a tragic accident caused by extreme weather and structural weaknesses. Total loss of the facility and 12 personnel in the collapse and subsequent fire. 3 survivors recovered, suffering from exposure and trauma-induced delusions caused by isolation, stress, and hypothermia. 5 bodies never recovered, presumed lost in the collapse or buried under tons of ice and rubble. An investigation was conducted. Blame was assigned to structural engineering flaws and inadequate weather monitoring. Compensation was paid to families. Case closed. No mention of dinosaurs. No mention of the cavern. No mention of what we'd unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. The discovery of the century had been erased, redacted from history, buried under layers of classified documents and official denials. But they showed me something during one of my final debriefings, a glimpse behind the curtain of secrecy that gave me nightmares for years. A colonel, his name badge reading Morrison, though I doubt that was his real name, pulled up classified satellite footage on a secure terminal in a windowless room. "We've been tracking thermal signatures across northern Greenland," he said, his voice carefully neutral, professionally detached. "Anomalous readings, large animals where no large animals should be, according to any known wildlife database." The footage showed heat, signatures moving across the frozen landscape with disturbing clarity, infrared imaging picking out warm bodies against the cold background, bipedal forms, moving in coordinated groups that suggested pack behavior and intelligence, at least 6 distinct individuals. Larger forms, quadrupedal, showing grazing patterns as they moved across the ice, searching for vegetation, or perhaps just confused by their new environment. And one massive signature, solitary and distinctive, that could only be the Spinosaurus, a creature that had no business existing, but did. Morrison's voice remained professional as he told me they'd neutralized 17 specimens over the past 2 months, using focused strikes and specialized teams, military operations in the Arctic that the world would never know about. He said he believed they'd gotten them all, his tone suggesting this was the official line he was required to deliver, the story he had to tell. He was lying, and we both knew it. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in the carefully neutral tone of his voice, sense it in the way he hesitated before speaking, in the way he couldn't quite meet my gaze. I asked him directly how many were really out there, how many they hadn't caught, how many had escaped into the vast Arctic wilderness. He closed the laptop with a decisive click, the screen going dark. "That's classified," he said, "above your clearance level." I pressed him about the cavern, asking how many more were in there, beyond what we'd seen, beyond what we'd documented. We'd only explored the first chamber, mapped only a fraction of the space. But that shape in the ice, the thing behind, the T-Rex that turned out to be the Spinosaurus, what else was deeper in? How big was the cavern system really? Were there more chambers, more specimens, more species we'd never seen? Morrison's expression hardened, his military mask slipping back into place. Your non-disclosure agreement covers speculation as well as facts, Dr. Cross. I'd advise you to focus on your recovery and let us handle the containment. Some knowledge is dangerous, some truths are better left buried. Containment. As if you could contain an entire lost world that was already spreading across the Arctic, adapting and breeding and establishing itself in a new ecosystem. As if you could put the gin back in the bottle once it had been released. As if extinction could be reimposed by force once it had been reversed by accident. They released me 3 weeks later, sending me back to what remained of my life with a severance package and a warning. My career was in ruins, my reputation destroyed by whispers and rumours that spread through the scientific community like wildfire. The scientists who knew me whispered that I'd had a breakdown, that isolation and grief had made me unstable, that I'd fabricated the whole story as some kind of elaborate delusion. The scientific community considered me delusional at best, a fraud at worst, a cautionary tale about the dangers of fieldwork in extreme conditions. The story had leaked somehow despite all the classified restrictions, twisted and distorted through the rumour mill until it sounded like bad science fiction or conspiracy theory, until it was dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized man who couldn't cope with the death of his colleagues. I tried to move on, tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life in the aftermath, but every news story about unusual animal sightings in the Arctic, every unexplained military activity in Greenland, every classified operation in the ice regions, I wondered. I watched the news obsessively, looking for patterns, for hints, for proof that I wasn't insane, that what I'd seen was real. Reports of polar bear attacks with unusual wounds, Inuit communities reporting missing sled dogs, destroyed camps, tracks in the snow that didn't match any known animal, ships reporting strange sounds in the Arctic night, vocalizations that marine biologists couldn't identify. All of it dismissed, explained away, buried under official denials. 6 months after the incident, I received an unmarked package at my apartment. Inside was a hard drive, no note, no return address, nothing to indicate who'd sent it or why or how they'd found me. The data on it was Liam's footage, everything he'd recorded during our time at the station, somehow retrieved or copied before the military confiscation. Hours and hours of video documentation from our first descent into the cavern to our final desperate flight across the ice. I watched it all, every minute of our discovery, our excitement, our hubris, and our terror. I watched Sophie die again, her final moments captured in high definition, the raptor's attack documented from multiple angles. I watched Jack's futile, last stand, his single shot missing its target by inches documented in slow motion. I watched Raymond's descent into guilt-driven madness, his mutterings about responsibility growing more disconnected from reality as the situation deteriorated. And I watched the dinosaurs, living and breathing and hunting with efficiency, refined over millions of years, moving with grace and intelligence that no fossil could ever capture, 66 million years extinct, brought back by human curiosity and arrogance, by our inability to leave well enough alone, by our drive to know what should remain unknown. I still have that hard drive, hidden in a secure location that I won't disclose, encrypted and backed up. I've never shown it to anyone, never uploaded it, never tried to prove what happened or vindicate myself. Who would believe it? The footage could be dismissed as elaborate CGI, a hoax, the desperate attempt of a disgraced scientist to reclaim his reputation through fabrication. Deep, fake technology has advanced to the point where nothing can be trusted anymore, where any video can be dismissed as manipulation, where truth itself has become negotiable. But I know it's real. Every frame, every pixel, every terrifying second captured on Liam's camera is genuine documentation of the impossible made real. Last month, a remote camera trap in Greenland's interior captured something that briefly circulated online before being scrubbed from mainstream platforms with suspicious speed. The image made the rounds on cryptozoology, websites and conspiracy forums for about 48 hours before disappearing, deleted from servers, removed from social media. It showed a large bipedal creature covered in what appeared to be rust-coloured feathers, its eyes reflecting the camera's infrared flash with an eerie glow that captured the light in a distinctly reptilian way. The official explanation came quickly, almost too quickly, suggesting preparation and coordination. A polar bear photographed at an unusual angle, they said. Trick of the light and perspective, they said. Move along, nothing to see here. But I know those eyes better than I know my own reflection in the mirror. I've seen them in my nightmares every single night for the past year, waking in cold sweats, reaching for weapons that aren't there. I've seen that distinctive profile, the shape of the skull, the position of the eyes, the structure of the jaw. That was a Velociraptor, alive and hunting in the 21st century, stalking prey across the Arctic ice, proof that our containment had failed or never existed in the first place. They're out there, spreading across the Arctic while authorities work to suppress any evidence, killing witnesses, destroying documentation, maintaining the official fiction that dinosaurs are extinct and staying that way. They're out there, and they're thriving. The ice continues to melt, year after year, revealing more of what should have stayed buried for eternity. More caverns, more specimens, more ancient terrors waiting to wake as the temperature rises degree by degree. Climate change isn't just raising sea levels and changing weather patterns, isn't just threatening coastal cities and agricultural regions. It's unlocking doors that have been sealed for millions of years, releasing things we're not prepared to handle, things we don't have defenses against, things that see us as prey rather than apex predators. We opened the door at Glacier Station Epsilon. We proved that extinction could be reversed, that death was not the end for species any more than for individuals, that the past could literally come back to haunt us with teeth and claws and hunger. And now we can't close it again, can't undo what we've done, can't put the creatures back in their frozen prison, can't unring the bell we've rung. I'm 43 years old now, though I feel ancient, aged beyond my years by what I've seen and survived. I've lost my son, my career, my sanity according to the official reports and psychiatric evaluations, but I know what I saw. I know what we unleashed upon the world that fateful day in May. The ice is melting faster every year, the process accelerating beyond climate models' predictions, feedback loops creating runaway warming that no political agreement can stop. Climate change, global warming, environmental collapse, call it what you will. Every summer, more glaciers carve into the sea, massive chunks of ancient ice breaking away and drifting south. More ancient ice turns to water, releasing whatever was trapped within. More secrets are revealed that should have remained hidden forever, preserved in that frozen tomb for all time. We found one cavern, just one small chamber in the vast expanse of Greenland's ice sheet. How many more are waiting beneath the ice across Greenland, Antarctica, the Arctic regions? How many other lost ecosystems are preserved in perfect stasis, waiting for the temperature to rise just enough, waiting for humans to be stupid enough to investigate? That's the question that keeps me awake at night, staring at my ceiling, while memories play behind my closed eyelids like a horror movie on endless repeat. Not the memory of Sophie's death, or Jack's sacrifice, or Raymond's guilt-driven suicide. Not even the nightmares about Tommy transforming into something cold and reptilian, though those haunt me too, with regularity. It's the knowledge that somewhere out there, under miles of ice across multiple continents, there are more of them, waiting, preserved perfectly, ready to wake up the moment the temperature rises above freezing, the moment their frozen prison melts enough to let them move, the moment someone like us is stupid enough to bring them to the surface. We're conducting the largest unplanned experiment in history. We're thawing the planet, melting the polar ice caps at a rate that terrifies climatologists, and we have no idea what we're releasing in the process. Ancient bacteria that could cause pandemics, extinct viruses that our immune systems have no defense against, prehistoric predators that see us as prey. The list of potential horrors grows longer every year as more ice melts and more secrets are revealed. I tried to warn them, tried to tell anyone who would listen about what we'd found and what it meant. I contacted scientists, journalists, government officials, anyone with influence or authority. But who believes the crazy scientist who talks about living dinosaurs in Greenland? Who takes seriously the man whose own psychiatric evaluation diagnosed him with trauma-induced delusions and recommended indefinite medication? I've been dismissed, ridiculed, threatened with legal action for violating my non-disclosure agreement, painted as a cautionary tale about the psychological dangers of Arctic research. So, I'm telling you this story now, putting it out into the world in the only way I can, as a narrative rather than a scientific report. Make of it what you will. Call it a cautionary tale, a horror story, a climate change allegory, or the ravings of a broken man who couldn't save his son and couldn't save his colleagues. Dismiss it as fiction if that helps you sleep at night, if that makes the world feel safer and more predictable. But remember this. Remember it well and share it with others. The ice is melting. Every day, a little more. The process is accelerating, feedback loops creating runaway warming that exceeds our worst predictions. And we have no idea what's waiting underneath, what horrors are preserved in that ancient ice, what nightmares we're about to release upon ourselves. In 2023, 5 researchers emerged from the Greenland ice sheet with a story authorities called impossible, a tale too incredible to believe. This is their account. You decide what to believe. You decide whether to dismiss it as fantasy or accept it as warning. But if you're ever in the Arctic, if you're ever on the ice in that endless white expanse where the horizon disappears into nothingness, and you see something moving in the distance that doesn't quite look right, that moves with a grace and purpose that no polar bear possesses, that watches you with intelligence no animal should have, then run. Don't stop to take pictures for social media. Don't try to get closer for a better look. Don't convince yourself it's your imagination, or a trick of the light, or too much coffee. Just run as fast as you can and don't look back, because what's behind you is 66 million years of hunger and evolution and perfect predatory design. Because 66 million years is a long time to be hungry, a long time to wait for the ice to melt, a long time to dream of hunting under open skies. And apex predators don't forget how to hunt, don't lose the instincts refined over millions of years of evolution, don't stop being what they are just because the world has changed around them. The iceberg contained a living prehistoric terror. We shouldn't have thawed it, but we did, driven by curiosity and ambition, and the human need to know what shouldn't be known, to touch the impossible, to prove that we can control forces beyond our understanding. And now we all have to live with the consequences of our actions, with the knowledge that extinction isn't permanent, that death can be reversed, that the past is never really dead. It's not even past. It's waiting under the ice, waiting for the world to warm just enough, waiting to wake up and reclaim a world that thought it was safe, thought it was the dominant species, thought extinction meant something was gone forever. We were wrong, so very, very wrong. And by the time the rest of the world realizes it, by the time the evidence becomes too overwhelming to suppress or deny, by the time the truth breaks through the official lies and cover-ups, it might already be too late to stop what we've started. The age of mammals is ending, dying not with a bang, but with a thaw. The age of reptiles is beginning again, not through evolution, but through resurrection, and we have only ourselves to blame for opening that frozen door, for unleashing terrors that should have stayed buried, for proving that some knowledge comes at a price too terrible to pay. The raptors are out there, the Spinosaurus is out there, the T-Rex is out there, and every year as the ice melts, more will join them. An army of the ancient dead returning to reclaim their world. And we, the mammals who thought we'd inherited the earth, are about to learn that we were only keeping it warm for the true apex predators, the creatures who ruled this planet for 180 million years and are ready to rule it again. Sleep well, if you can.